Hi, my name is Jehan Ara. I am the founder and CEO of Katalyst Labs. And this is a series that we have started called Katalyzing Conversations. And today we are fortunate to have with us Maheen Rahman, who is the CEO of InfraZamin. Hi, Maheen.
Hi, Jehan Ara, and so good to see you. And thank you so much for having me on this conversation.
Good to see you too. So we'll dig right in. And I would like to start by asking you, what is it that defines Maheen Rahman?
Oh, wow, that is a big question. But I think, I think those the principles that I've kind of always tried to live by and brought into my professional and personal life. And that I think is just, I'm a very straightforward person and I like to keep things simple and I like to keep them clear. And above all, I think in terms of work ethic, I just try that things are done with integrity and things are done in the most easiest and straightforward manner possible. So I think that's just sort of the ethos that I've kind of adopted over many years. And I believe that that does work well, even in Pakistan, in business environments, in personal situations. I think the key thing is, I think, just always be straight with everyone, and that keeps you grounded, and it keeps the other person confident that whatever you're saying is something that can be relied upon.
No, absolutely right. So tell us, what was it like growing up as Maheen? What were you like? We'd like to get an insight as to, how you developed into the person that you've become. So what were you like growing up? Were you a very serious child, fun
Hmm.
child, somebody who knew exactly what they were doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think as growing up, your family plays a big role here, right? So, and I do give credit to my family on this one that they never brought in that whole, you can't do this because you're a girl or you can't do that because you're a girl. And I think that shaped quite a bit of my thinking because it meant that effectively, there shouldn't really be any barriers in life, right? And that's kind of how it was growing up. I think I came from a very normal family. My father worked with Unilever. My mother was a housewife. I had a younger brother. We lived in a joint family system. So at an early age, you kind of have that whole family interaction. So family values become very important. So that's the kind of environment that I grew up in. And I really do cherish those times because I think now the trend is slowly shifting away from those joint family systems. But I do think they give children a lot of support and a lot of solidity growing up. I mean, beyond that, I don't think I was an exceptional student. I was never like the dean's lister type, but I think I did well enough in school to get through fairly well, both in my undergraduate and in my master's. I think the whole persistence space kind of thing, just took off. So I like to have my fun and I like to study, and I wasn't a nerd or I wasn't a total party animal. So I think I was somewhere in the middle. So that was the balance that kind of came across growing up.
Okay. And did you always want to work in finance? Always wondered, when did the love affair with finance actually begin? Was it someone or something that inspired you in that direction? Or was it something you thought you always wanted to do?
So
Numbers
I think,
excited you.
yes. So I think I always wanted to work somewhere. I just didn't know until I think perhaps most likely somewhere in my undergraduate, whether it was going to be a finance related field or otherwise. But I always wanted to work. So there was none of this idea that I'm just going to, be, just stay home or be a housewife or just raise children. I always wanted more. And I think if you want to do those things, that's fine. But for those of us that are looking for branching out a bit more, I always wanted to make sure that I was in the corporate workspace, and that realization I think came to me very early on. I would say almost like grade 6 or 7 or 8 or something like that. I think once I got into my undergraduate and sort of your horizon broadens in terms of which areas you want to end up in. I read this book called Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis, and it was about um, Wall Street in the 1980s and about the bond trading houses and how all the great, sort of investment banks that you hear about and you see in the movies, they were kind of talked about, Lehman Brothers and Merrill and Goldman and. So I think that got me very excited because I had never sort of understood that life, and that book really, kind of brought it all alive for me. And I think that's when the love affair with finance really began. That what is all this about? This sounds so glamorous. Is it really everything that it's projected to be? That we see all these movies done on Wall Street, etc. So I think that's where the initial fascination came, and I think that is when I decided, okay, let's try this and see how it works out.
So were you always good at math or science subjects?
I think I think all you need really in finance, unless you're like a quant or derivatives trader, is probably grade 7 maths is good enough to get you through most of the banking bits and pieces. So I don't think you have to be amazing at it. As long as you understand your basic algebra, I think you'll be fine. So I did all right in maths, and that certainly paid off so far.
Okay. So I was reading one of your old interviews where you mentioned that being a female CEO leaves you with no chance of making a mistake, as all eyes are waiting for that one wrong move. Is that still true? Tell us a little bit
Absolutely.
about your struggles of being a female leader in this industry.
Absolutely. I think that because there's so few, and whether you look at it in Pakistan, so there are very few, but even internationally, there are not many female leaders in finance, right? And the reality is that you don't come into the field looking to be a role model or looking to do so well or anything. You come into the field because it excites you and you want to, learn more about it. Um, but I think as you get more senior up the ranks, and it doesn't even have to be at the C level, but even as a manager or as a senior manager or as a director, I think because women are so uncommon in the corporate workspace, their presence is just always noticed. And that can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. The good thing is that you have a chance to be noticed, so everything you say or do or will just be highlighted, and that will naturally follow you. But I think on the flip side, because there's so much scrutiny, anytime something goes wrong or you don't deliver on what you said you were going to deliver, all of a sudden it turns out, oh, but औरत है और औरत का इस फील्ड में क्या ये तो होना ही था, या औरत क्या जानती है, ये बहुत सुना है लाइफ में. So it can, the unique part of being a woman here, I think that can work in your favor, but then you also have to counter a lot of biases. And every time something goes wrong, it's not Maheen that gets blamed, it's the entire gender that carries that blame. And similarly,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
And similarly, if you succeed, then yes, okay, it's Maheen that succeeds, but it also becomes recognized that, okay, women can do this. It's not something that should be. So even though you don't set out trying to represent an entire gender, you would rather just be recognized for your skills. It ends up just being that way. So dono side pe reward as well as failure are do not become individual, they become a much wider issue. So I think that way there's less room, at least for women, to fail, because the second they fail, the whole gender takes a hit. And similarly, as they succeed, you set that path. So this is not the case for men, I guess, because men have been in the corporate workspace, they are recognized there, it's not unusual to see men here. So that way, that aspects doesn't get highlighted, so things become much more personalized for men. But for women, I think it's the opposite.
So tell us from your own example, climbing up this corporate ladder, were there any instances that you would like to share where, your own personality and your perseverance actually carried you through any of the struggles that you faced, any biases that you faced?
I mean, there's quite a few that comes to mind, but maybe let's pick the one where I actually did get that break from being a senior level resource to becoming an actual CEO, because that happened very early on in my career. And I think it's interesting that what was happening before that, and what pushed people, or my bosses at the time, to pick me in that particular role. So again, we were just coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, and I had just switched firms. So I had gone from BMA as their research head to IGI on their sales desk, and it was a different role. And the I was just trying to fulfill that job responsibility, which was the sales desk, right? So I had to be sure that I was meeting clients and I was getting in revenue, and, I was keeping the whole team in line. So those were my core sort of functions. Now, I was doing all this while I was also 6 months pregnant. Which kind of then got appreciated, I would say, a lot more. So I never let that physical issue kind of get in the way of my job delivery. So by the time I actually went on maternity leave, the wheels were already in motion, as far as the senior leadership was concerned, to push me into a CEO role. So I think, the reality is that whatever job you do, if you try and do it well here, and you try and deliver results, and you exceed those expectations, you can't do it all the time, but certainly 80-90% of the time you should be aiming to exceed expectations. It does get recognized in Pakistan. So I think it was a confluence of lucky events, but at the same time, I did not try and let any personal issues affect the work I was doing. And I think that was very appreciated. So those are the kind of, when I talk about work ethic and I talk about that integrity and delivery of targets and goals and performance, those things become very important. In Pakistan, I find that the productivity of people generally in the workspace is low, and you really have to push everyone to get results. And this kind of filters across all, I will say, all industries. So anytime I would say that there is someone pushing to try and do a bit more, that person will get elevated in Pakistan very quickly. So I won't say that I'm an isolated incident. All I will say here is that I wanted to push for more and more, and because of that, I got more and more. And if you don't push for that, and if you just say, I'm just going to do ABC and I'm not going to do XYZ, then perhaps you just won't get noticed to that level, and perhaps that opportunities don't come to you as fast. So, that's the way I went into it. Yeah, that's the way I kind of went into it.
Yeah, it's what you put in, and that's what delivers the results, right? So tell us a little bit about Maheen's leadership style. What is your leadership style as opposed to other people that you know? Or, I'm not talking about men and women, just your own personal leadership style.
So I think it's transitioned a lot over the years. I think this is now my 13th year as leading a company, right? So initially I was very detail focused. So I would wanted to get into everything, and I wanted to understand everything, and I wanted to learn everything. And now I think I'm the ultimate delegator. I now that I've figured out how the nuts and bolts of most things work, I like to empower people below me to run with things themselves and not have to rely on me so much for every decision or everything like that. So for me now, the style has transitioned from being very operational, to now being more of a looking at the strategic direction a company needs to go in, and then making sure I have the people around me that can understand my vision as well as I do, and are willing to come on with me on this journey. So now I'm very much about empowering and not doing, and then my job then as a leader is to make sure that everybody is running in the same direction, and so that's the kind of ethos that I'm working with now. Who knows what it transitions into later, but
Right.
at this stage this is working at the
And
moment.
do you think, Maheen, that the kind of people that you have been looking for or that you have hired, that a large number of such people exist in the Pakistan workforce?
I think you do find good quality people. I think it's very, very important that if you want quality, please be prepared to pay for it. And I think it is unfortunate that हमारी mentality ही होती है जब हम salary negotiations पे आते हैं, इन चीजों पे आते हैं, they just try and get as as a good a deal as possible. But I think you have to look beyond the just the pay package that someone is kind of coming with, or the price tag someone is coming with, and see what value will they add to the business and how will they help the business grow. Ultimately, you want people around you that are actually better than you, because then that lifts every business unit, that lifts every operational department, and ultimately your job as CEO is made so much easier because they just get what you're trying to do. So for me, I recognize the job that someone has to do, and I compensate that accordingly, and the rest comes from all the sort of softer aspects of an individual, their motivation, their drive, their willingness to succeed. So I do think you can find that HR in Pakistan. It is a challenge, I think, as organizations get bigger and bigger, to keep that quality intact. But that's on where your hiring pool is and where you're hiring from. So there's plenty of ways to kind of crack that one. But you're right, it's HR is not an easy fix here. But I have found that if you compensate and you reward according to that person's job rather than who the individual is, and then allow them to grow into that job and empower them to deliver. When employees can make their own decisions and can see their decisions leading to a difference in the organization, that's when they will be the most motivated. For me, it's very important to keep that challenge alive for them.
Okay, so now let's move to your new baby. Tell us about this company, InfraZamin Pakistan, and what does it actually do?
Right, fair question. I've been asked that many times over the last few months. So, InfraZamin is effectively what we're here to do is support infrastructure finance. And you know that in Pakistan, there's a big infrastructure deficit, whether it's in the form of roads or hospitals or, water treatments or dams or etc. We have a big gap here, right? So much to fill in. And what we do is quite unique. So I don't think there are too many companies in the world even doing this, and even fewer in Pakistan doing this. Is that we are trying to effectively mobilize local currency, meaning local banks, local mutual funds, local financing institutions, to lend to infrastructure projects here. And the way we do that is we provide sort of credit guarantees against the bank lending that happens. So, for example, if you're a bank and you want to fund a project, but you just don't like the risk and you don't want to take the risk and you don't like who the borrower is, we'll come in if the project makes sense to us and if it's feasible. Then we'll give the bank a guarantee that should that project ever go into default and your loans don't get paid, we'll pay you. So we'll take on the risk of the project so that you can lend to them. And that kind of comfort that we give to the banks or the investors in the capital market, that goes a long way towards local funding of such infrastructure projects. So that's really the gap that we're trying to fill here. And we don't need a huge amount of guarantee cover. Sometimes just a little bit will do it. So we hope that with that, not only do we hit the target of promoting infrastructure finance in Pakistan, but we're also able to sort of help Pakistan in terms of the deficit on infrastructure. And because we do everything under a development framework, we hope to move a little bit closer to the SDG goals that Pakistan has, Sustainable Development Goals, whether it comes in the form of climate change or environment or gender or poverty, etc. Those are the real impacts that we're trying to create through such guarantee structures.
So I know it's early days yet, but what has the general response been to the launch of InfraZamin and what you're trying to do, both
I
from
think
the
very,
government as well as the private sector?
yeah.
What's the
So
response?
I think very positive, and the reason it's been positive, one, because the government has been very welcoming, because de-risking projects is something that has been needed for a long time to get the banking sector to lend. So the government certainly has been very supportive post our launch event, and even before. I would say the regulators have been involved with us for the last almost 2 years in bringing InfraZamin to the position that we are in now. And then at the same time, the private sector, the corporates that we are looking to work with, we have seen quite a bit of demand come in regarding our our guarantees. And we also have a few projects now in the pipeline. So we hope that we'll hit closure on some of these in the next 6 to 12 months, and then we'd love to talk more about them, to see where we've made that difference and where we've made that impact.
So, what about the people who are backing you? What do you think made them back you in such a big way? What did
Yeah.
it take? I mean, it's very interesting because it's difficult for people in Pakistan to actually get the trust and the confidence of large organizations from around the world to come and back you in something that you're trying to do, which is very different from, as you yourself said, anything that's being done anywhere in the world. So, what do you think it took, and how much effort on your part? What were
Hmm.
the things you did? I think that would be great learning for many of us.
I think that's a really interesting question because when I was at Alfala, I wasn't really particularly looking to move at that time. So I think when my sponsors approached me, I think very quickly the chemistry just fit. So we kind of spoke the same language. And the mission and the vision of the group, which is the Private Infrastructure Development Group, or the PIDGE group as we call it, their mission really is to promote financing opportunities in frontier markets. And it comes from the very inherent belief that capital markets don't always work in countries like Pakistan. People who want financing, they don't always get it from the banks. I mean, I think that's something you're very familiar with, that it's hard to get capital for new projects. And whether you're looking at the startup tech space or you're looking at the big infrastructure projects, I tell you, across the board, it is very hard to convince banks to lend to you, and it is very hard to find investors willing to take a bet on you. And I think that's something that I've also been talking about for many years, is that as a capital and as financial markets in Pakistan, we've forgotten how to take risk. We are here to financially intermediate between depositors and borrowers, but instead what happens is that banks take deposits from all of us, they lend them to the government by buying treasury bills and T-bills, and so do the mutual funds, so do the pension funds, so does pretty much everyone who has the money. And on the flip side, what you end up with is an economy where new projects don't come, where entrepreneurship does not happen, where greenfield projects are looked down upon, and they won't get that access to finance without some means of addressing that gap. And that's where the InfraZamin guarantee comes in. So I think, just the language that both myself and the sponsor spoke was just the same. And so then it just clicked. I got their mission, they got my frustration, and we put that together and we said, how can we make this actually work? How can we fix this market failure that we have over here? So I think it was just a meeting of very similar minds, and that's what clicked it for me, and that's what clicked it for them. So thankfully, I think right place, right time, right thought, and then it just came together.
No, it's amazing that that happened, but you're right. I mean, there are so many opportunities here in emerging markets like Pakistan, but it's very difficult to get anybody to look at many of those opportunities seriously and provide the kind of capital and support that's required. So that drives me to the next question. We're seeing suddenly the fintech landscape in Pakistan changing with new startups coming in this sector and new investments happening. The industry seems to be on the path of growth. Do you feel the fintech space needs more collaboration of traditional institutions with upcoming startups? Or is there a need for these institutions to transform internally?
I think a bit of both, right? So fintechs on their own, may not be able to get the mass volume and scale that is required. At the end of the day, you look at and commercial banks with their current processes will find it very challenging to keep up with what fintechs are offering. So it has to be a mix of both. I think banks have to change the way that they look at digital banking, and that's happening. I think the vast majority of banks that I look at have, expanded their digital offering tremendously. COVID has certainly helped in that process, but we need to get much bigger. Um, I think the potential can be easily, expressed when you look at next door India, where you've just had Paytm's IPO, right?
Right.
Um, and Paytm is a very interesting model and something that can be replicated here. What you have today is probably a regulator in the form of the state bank that is very conducive to moving towards digital Pakistan. Is probably still a little bit conservative in terms of who they allow licensing to for such products. But ultimately, I think it's going to come from a marriage between the banks and the fintech companies. I think one taking over the other, given the regulatory environment and the way that customer confidence is still kind of focused on the brands, which the banks carry, I think you will have to merge the two. So it's going to be very hard for a startup fintech to develop brand confidence or customer confidence in their product offering. But the minute you tie that with a big brand such as HBL or Mizan or Alfala, any of those, suddenly the consumer confidence level will go up. The want to use the product on the fintech side will go up. And at the same time, the reach that a bank can offer will also increase. So if you want to do this quickly, it has to come from that marriage. I don't think either one, either a bank on its own or a fintech company on their own, will be able to push this out as effectively, because the innovation comes from the fintech side, but the distribution capacity comes from the banking sector.
Right. So you mentioned Paytm in India. What do you think we can learn from the way other countries' ecosystems have developed? Is there anything specific? Are there countries similar to ours where you think we can learn from the mistakes they've made or from the successes they've had?
I think what we first have to understand in Pakistan here is that fintechs or any tech startup needs to find local funding. Okay, for every 10, there's only so much we see funding we'll see from abroad. Eventually, local groups have to figure out what this market is all about, and the sooner they do that, I think the better. So, with VC investing, you'll invest in 10 companies. None of them may succeed, or one of them may succeed, but all of them succeeding is like a very minor possibility, right? So that ability to take risk needs to come from the local market as well, not just from international VCs who understand how this works. So, we have to get beyond the whole sort of risk aversion, or if you like, the state culture, or the way big groups are looking at this, and look at this as an experimental pot, and make sure that we have local funds that can go to local companies. It shouldn't always come from abroad. There needs to be that local push as well. Once you develop that access to capital, that whole market, which is access to capital, all of a sudden you find many more entrepreneurs, many more young people, many more startups who can find the funding will then show up. It's a bit of a chicken and egg, but the funding needs to be created. Now, if you pick up China or you pick up India, they have spent billions in state funds and private funds in trying to support the startup ecosystem, and the we haven't really looked at that at all. We've kind of looked at the rules, and we've certainly improved the rules a lot. The sandbox concepts that SECP has brought out, and we're looking at it from that perspective. But the actual groups that have the money to fund startups have not started doing it in any big or meaningful way. You need billions of dollars to come in here, and then you will find your first unicorn or your second unicorn, right? And it takes that money to develop. If you pick up the world's best startup ecosystem, is probably Silicon Valley, and there it's all about access to capital and making sure then that those companies have the resources to grow and to scale up, whether it is through mergers or acquisitions or whatever it is. So, creating that environment which is less regulation heavy and capital heavy is what will get you there. It may take 1 year, it may take 5 years, it may take 10 years, but without these three elements, that the regulation can't be too stringent, the capital must be easy to come by, and the ability to merge and start a new company and take over another company, those things must be quick and fast, because startups need money quickly. They can't wait 2 years for their next round, right? If they're running out of cash, they're running out of cash. So, when these three or four things come together, that's when you get that bubble of excitement that gets created, and that's when you get more and more people willing to look at this. Abhi, right now you're still very much focused on traditional industries, and startup and fintechs are still a small portion. I think one area where, sorry, just to finish this up, one
Sure.
area which can be a starting point on the IT framework is the big IT companies. You've got systems, you've got NetSol, you've got TRG. These guys are the ones that should take the first step towards both developing the supply of engineers and software engineers, and have those nurseries in place, and also pushed forward their learning on how they became bigger in Pakistan to the startup culture. You have to start with your own local firms, rather than rely so much on the international ones.
Right. And do you see any of that happening? Do you see local, industry players, family businesses, IT sector? Do you see any of them moving towards making this happen? Or do you think it'll take a
I
long
think
time?
it'll take a bit more time. I think for local business groups, the bigger ones have certainly started exploring it, but like I said, not in such a huge way as to have a massive impact on the ecosystem. I think the international lens on Pakistan has certainly gotten a lot sharper with regards to startup investments, and most likely what you'll see is that the push will come from international, and then the locals will wake up and say, "Hey, we got to do this as well." So I wish it were the other way around, but we'll that's probably how it will go here in Pakistan. You'll need one solid unicorn or one or two solid companies to come out of this space, and then everyone locally will want to replicate the model. So that's just the way it goes. So we're not quite there yet. I think we've done a really good job over the last year and a half during COVID in expanding our digital footprint, but still much, much more. For a country our size and the kind of coverage we have on cell phones and the number of smartphone users we have, there's still much more I think that can be done.
And is there anything more that the government can do? We've seen that there has been a, good movement both at the SCCP and State Bank level. Is there anything more that they could immediately do to help this move along?
I think they put in a fair amount in place with regards to facilitation, right? And I think the other thing that they are promoting is certain technology zones to come up, tech zones that they're trying to create in different cities, etc. And the early indications are that those are being received very positively from both local as well as international firms that want to take advantage of those facilities. And I think that that vision has to be carried forward. These ideas have to be sustained by the government. I think it is a challenge for the government in any case these days to raise funds, so creating a state owned fund for startups may not really yet be on the cards. But I think certainly in terms of the incentives that special economic zones can bring towards the tech industry, that realization absolutely is there. And I think you saw within the budget that happened in June, there is a very cognizant desire to push forward the digital agenda. So I think that the private sector needs to continue to engage with the government, to engage with the ministries, keep putting forward the points across. At the moment, the realization is there, and I think we should just capitalize on that.
Right. Okay, so I think one part is the financing, the infrastructure, and the second very important part is the human resource and the training and the development. So, what kind of career advice would you have for young professionals and entrepreneurs in developing themselves so that they can then contribute to the industry in general?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important point, and that's where I think Pakistan's IT space struggles, because the best minds that we get from the computer science programs that are held with universities, they tend to jump abroad and they tend to do it pretty quickly in their career. And then what we do is we end up hiring them back at much more higher premiums later on. I think one, we need more institutes that will train and develop software engineers, many more. It can't just be five or six as a handful. I think one area which large IT firms can also collaborate in is setting up of such institutes that look to train specific software skills, and that responsibility should lie on the big software companies that we have, whether it's TRG or NetSol or Systems or anyone else, because they really are the nursery, right, breeding ground for this labor supply. So one area needs to be covered from there. In terms of young people who are looking for a career, I think there's never been a brighter time, right, to be in tech and to be in that. So pick that computer science course in college. Make sure you understand how the programming side of things work. It changes so quickly. And then I would also say that while you may certainly the offer from Microsoft or Amazon looks really enticing, but at the same time the growth potential of the Pakistan market is a lot higher, which means that you could find that opportunity here very, very quickly, as opposed to if you went abroad to work for some of the bigger names, because there the competition pool is much higher. So that's the same that applies for all industries in Pakistan, because the competition pool thins out pretty fast. Your ability to do well and be recognized well is much faster in the Pakistan landscape than it would be elsewhere. So do take that into consideration as well.
Okay. Quite right. What, according to you, are some of the must-have skills for young women who aspire to excel in their careers and become leaders in their fields of work? So I guess this would apply both to young men and women, but I'm focusing a little more on the women because I find that there are gaps as far as they're concerned. So is there any particular advice that you would want to give to young women who want to build themselves as leaders?
I think the simple thing is that don't let anyone else tell you that you can't do something. I think this society and everyone around you just tells you can't do anything or you can't do this because that's not your role. I think both for men and women, don't let someone do that. Always believe in yourself. And if you have a dream, then work towards it and realize it. And you will face setbacks, but that's part of life. And you will have successes as well and celebrate those. So celebrate your successes, learn from your failures, and whatever you do, be stubborn about achieving your goals and ambitions. So I think that applies to both men and women, but at the end of the day, I think we get pulled back too much by what will society say or what will someone else say. Ignore that. You have to be somewhat stubborn if you want to do anything new or anything that's perhaps not been done before. So keep that spirit alive.
Yeah. Okay, and what do you think we as a country and as a people can do to increase the opportunities that are available for women in this country? Because yes, we have progressed over the years, but there's still a long way to go. Is there anything that we can do, both as government and private sector or as individuals, to increase the number of women who enter our workforce?
I think, like I said, make it easy for them, and that comes in many forms. I think one step forward the corporates have to take, and the other step forward the women actually have to take themselves as well, right? So if I address the first one, I think online work and work from home over COVID have basically changed, many things. And one of those is certainly that you don't need to be in the office 24/7, or you don't need to be around all the time in order to get work done, because we've learned now over the last 2 years that that's not really necessary. So I think that has made quite a change in terms of who you hire and how corporates make that hiring decision, right? So it should, before, I will be very honest and say, in banks and financial institutions, other corporates, sometimes you say, oh, girls can't sit late, they can't work late, so we have to we shouldn't consider them. It does happen. That's the reality. But in situations where work delivery is now looked upon, okay, I want my work done at this time and don't really care where you do it from, let's change that equation a little bit. So on the hiring front, at least, this should help. And I think corporations should certainly be looking to be more gender neutral in their policies when they are hiring. I think the State Bank, SCB, they've also come out with various gender policy initiatives, etc., and those will help going forward also. Now I come to the way women look at work themselves. What I found in the past is that usually a career is not considered top priority for a woman in Pakistan. It's nice to have some income to earn, but if it becomes inconvenient, or if the family doesn't like it, or if it takes too much time away from the kids, then women will usually drop out of the workspace. So I think, this confidence has to come from both sides. Employers have to feel that once they put in that effort to training someone, that person will not up and leave for whatever reasons, but will try and find a way to make it work. And similarly, on women entering the workspace, if they want to, then they should recognize the steps that the employer is making, the flexibility that an employer is offering them, and give the same back in terms of work delivery as well. So it's a two-way street. It can't just be one way. But I think that the digital economy certainly is something which will hopefully change that equation. But it is going to take some time, specifically in terms of changing people's attitudes around this.
Absolutely. It's commitment
Yeah.
from both sides.
Yeah.
So let's end with something personal. What does Maheen Rahman do in her free time? Or do you not have any free time?
You should always have free time. And so I love to spend time with my kids. I love to spend time as a family. I like physical activity, so I do a lot of yoga. And I think it's really important to keep your work-life balance. So, socialize with your friends, spend time as a family, take trips together. I think those are the things that keep me going, for sure.
That's great. Thank you so much, Maheen, for spending so much time with us. I'm sure that a lot of people will listen to this interview and will learn a few things from it. And I think there's certain points that we covered which will probably help the corporate sector and individuals to look at things in a different way. Good luck with your new initiative with InfraZamin, and
Thank
we
you.
hope to talk to you again in about 6 to 8 months to see where you've gotten to.
Sounds great, Jana, and thank you so much for
Okay.
the opportunity. Look
Thank
forward
you.
to it. Thank
Bye,
you. Take
Maheen.
care.
Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.